Greetings to everyone and welcome to the alignment space where we teach and engage on different topics that are related to our life within the church. Today we are dealing with a subject, church policy and the grace. And this is where we want to just look at the balance between how we implement church policy, the laws of the church that govern the running of the church, but we also are a religious or spiritual institution where grace is very important. Now, on this very important subject, I have got somebody that I think is more than qualified to help us navigate through the balance between the two important subjects of church policy and the grace. His name is Mr. John Mokwele, who is currently the Limpopo Synod YMG Secretary and is a legally qualified graduate and has been involved in church at various platforms in different leadership positions. This included serving in the disciplinary committee of the Limpopo district and also advising on various disciplinary matters in the church. In fact, he has participated in the reviewing of the chapter 11 of the Book of Order, which is a chapter that deals with the discipline of members and ministers. Mr. Mokwele, welcome.
Good morning, and welcome to everybody.
Thank you, Dada. Thank you for allowing us to come on this space and sharing with us.
Thank you.
Firstly, maybe let's start at the very basic level, and that is just to look at the law and society. As human beings, we are people of conscience. We've got brains, we've got the conscience, we know what is right and wrong, we can make decisions. Why do we need the law in society generally, let alone in church?
Okay, what has been practiced in the past is that people, when they come together as a group, they agree on principles to say, this is how we are going to live together. These are the things that will agree to happen in our environment and those that will not. And that was basically what was referred to as common law, things that people must agree to, but then the law has to be codified so that it can then be written for everybody to read, so that people who are coming from outside, they will then understand what is it that in this environment I'm becoming a member.
Yes.
What is it that is required of me? Yes.
Now, I can understand that in terms of society, because you've got people that are not really believers. But within the church, we are people of faith. We are led by the Spirit. We are obedient people who follow Jesus Christ. Why do we need the law within the church?
I think what has been said is that even in the church, I mean, there are human beings and people who are in a position to fall into sin. And the church decided to say, let's have law that will govern that situation in case a person has fallen into misconduct or transgression that are not accepted. Hence, the church decided to have its own laws and discipline so that it can say, in this environment, even though we are governed by grace, but you need to understand there should be certain things that the law must address for us so that we practice principles of fairness and justice across the board.
Okay. Now clearly we've got the Book of Order, or the Laws and Discipline, as I prefer to call it, and we have got the Bible, which is our book of faith. In terms of your understanding or your view on these two books, which one should literally be on, or the one on top of the other? Is it the Bible on top of the law, or the law on top of the Bible?
I mean, when it comes to behavioral conduct, the Bible should be, because it's the one that says how we should behave as a Christian. Because I think one person, the minute says, I accept Jesus Christ as my Savior, it means that he's accepting to change his life and live like a Christ-like person. And the law is just to manage instances where there is misconduct, instances where people fall off the root of that kind of behavior that has been agreed upon. So it is not a matter of saying, if we have a problem, where do we check? Do we look at the Bible or at the law? We have to then first say, but what kind of misbehavior is this one that requires attention that we look into. Yes.
And I think what you're saying is important, because in my own understanding, and just coming really from my position as a minister and understanding how we're supposed to conduct ourselves in terms of our spirituality and life in faith, is that really the administration of the law should not be punitive, isn't it? We seek to correct.
Yes, to rehabilitate those who are conduct or doing wrong things.
To rehabilitate, to correct people. But essentially, if we were all to just be able to live with the principles of the grace and the law of God and the Bible, we really would still have the book of the law and really never use it, ideally. And then that is really ideally, in an ideal perfect world, we shouldn't really be having too much to do with the law, isn't it?
Not necessarily not having too much to do with the law, because even the Bible said that there were instances whereby the law has to be used. When people misconducted themselves, they'll say, we'll use the law of Moses, which says this is how we govern misbehavior within the environment. So what we need to be doing is that we need not necessarily be dependent on the law to address our challenges. We need to be saying, what is it that is intended? Because as Christian movement, the church's intention is to bring grace. And when people got baptized, they are saying they are given the foretaste of heaven by being given the grace. So it is very important that people understand the relationship they build during covenant, to say what type of relationship. Because when you talk about covenant relationship, is something deeper than just meeting together as two people.
Yeah, but the point I really am making, it is that in terms of our moral and ethical conduct as human beings, we strive as the church to be to model and mold people to be moral beings, to be ethical beings, to be people of good conduct and behavior. And this is what I think now in the church setting should really be our primary aim, is to avoid a point where a Christian, a believer, would even need to be chastised by the law, to be pulled back into. And of course, as you said, we are sinful people, we are people that are fallible, we make mistakes, so we need the law in that sense. But essentially, we should strive for perfection as our doctrine, as Methodists.
Yes, I think that is correct. And we shouldn't be worried about what the law says, because as Christians we should be worried what the Bible says, what God says to us, how we should behave, because indeed we are trying to become morally correct. But one thing that we need to acknowledge is that there are those that will say this is how things should be done, but they continue to do wrong things, and it becomes now a behavior, a norm that we don't want to allow to happen in the church. So hence we have a law. But in essence, the law should not be our first priority. Our first priority is what the Bible says in terms of ensuring that we become one in the Bible.
Right. Yeah. Now, both the law and the grace itself are administered by human beings. So let's take an example of a person within the church who has transgressed the law. And Mokwele is the chairperson of the committee, Mogomotsi, and there are people here. And yet there are allegations or stories that are going around in the grapevine, in social settings, that no, Mokwele did this, maybe he stole money and he was never charged and all that. And the question then becomes, who has got the right and the authority to adjudicate matters of discipline within the church? Because some people will say whoever says does not have sin is a liar and we are all guilty. Yeah. So if a person brings that kind of argument, how do we balance that out?
Hence it is very important that when people who appointed to deal with discipline in the church should be people of good moral standing. People who should not doubt their credibility in terms of their behavioral conduct. So it is very important that when you sit there adjudicating over a case, people should not be saying, but how do you judge my case when I know deep down that you have committed a similar offense as mine?
Yes.
The fortunate part on your part is that it is not yet known that you have done that.
Yes.
So it is very important that we need to balance the two so that we ensure that we bring in people that are of good moral standing with good ethics, and so that people understand that wrong is wrong, and that we need people of integrity, people who know that I don't have to do things because I'm not being seen. I have to do things because it is what I believe in, so that we don't have to have instances whereby when we have to mete out justice, then people are going to be questioning our moral standing to say, how dare you do it when I know that you are doing the same things. Yeah.
Now, one of my criticism around leadership, whether in church or in government or in business and all that, I think the crisis of our leadership, where we are at the moment, is poor ethics, lack of integrity, lack of morality, and that is where the problem. I mean, you talk about corruption in the state, you talk about corruption in church, in any other sector of society. It all boils down to the issue of ethical leadership. What is your view, and I know I'm now throwing you into a different space here with ethical leadership, but I know you can roll with that. What is your view around moral and ethical leadership issues, given that as the church we should be the moral guide for society?
I think what we need to be doing as a church is that we should not lose sight of the need for integrity and ethical leadership. Because what I've seen happen in many instances is that the church tend to turn a blind eye, especially bringing into issues of personality, who the person is, who's doing that, and which creates a problem. Because as Mogomotsi is bringing money to the church, we are not even asking where does he get this money, because we know that with his salary he cannot afford to do what he's doing for the church. But because we are saying we are benefiting, we don't ask those things. So it is very important that we start questioning to say, but how do you, so that we don't find ourselves compromised. Because in the current environment, many of our leaders in the church are being compromised because they were part of corruption indirectly, because they benefited by getting donation from those corrupt leaders, by getting many of the things that we were not supposed to get. So it is very important that as a church, we need them to say, but how do we manage that kind of a situation so that we don't compromise the church? And then people started saying, but what type of a church is this one? That we are now even harboring those we allege are corrupt officials, because we are saying they are not yet, remember the issue of saying innocent until proven guilty. So, but the fact of the matter is that when it comes to ethics, it's not an issue about innocent before found guilty, but it's the issue of saying, in your conscience, what do you say? Do you believe you have committed in that? And if that is what you think you have done and you believe you are part of what the church stands for, the best thing is for you to come out and say, I'm sorry. And apologizing is very important, but that's what lacks in the church.
All right.
Yeah.
Now you've just in one sentence mentioned the issue of personalities, and this I think is the elephant in the room that I want us to now focus on. The whole issue of personalities. I mean, we've had a case which was in the public eye of a very powerful well-known figure and leader within our church, and in instances where the person is really powerful and wields influence, and I mean, he has been doing very well over the years and is well respected, and they fall into sin or they contravene our laws, like it happened some few months ago. How do we balance that with perceptions of favor and unfairness simply because is Mr. So and so is the mighty, the powerful and untouchable? How do we deal with the issue of the untouchables within the church?
I think what is important is that the church needs to take a stand against such types of incidences, regardless of who the person is. Because when you do not, you are bringing the church into disrepute.
Yes.
Because then people have their own perceptions, and perceptions are very dangerous until proven. So it is very important that the church must deal with people who are misbehaving, regardless of their position in the church, regardless of their influence, so that we know that the law in the church favors everybody, whether you are poor or you are rich, so that we know that if you come into the church and you do certain things, we'll know you'll be judged the same way as this person who has money all over the show and being able to donate everything. So what is important that the church must stand up and say, we are not tolerating this kind of behavior within ourselves, because we are a people of God.
All right. Now, how do we empower the least and the weak within us? I mean, I'm just thinking about a young girl in rural Limpopo who does not even understand this book that we are talking about, the book of order and all that, and the confidence is low. They are poor, they are vulnerable, and yet they have been violated within the church by a member of the church. Let's call that person even a minister within the church. How do we empower the least, the unknown, and the weak within the church to be able to access justice through the instruments of the law?
I think what is important, first and foremost, for people to be given information. It says knowledge is power. And if we let people know that there's this protection that they will get in instances they have been violated, and we need to give them space to speak out.
Yes.
And where they are unable to speak out, we need to have champions, people who will speak out on their behalf, so that people stand up and say, this is the child that I'm not going to be allowed to allow that she be violated and remain silent, so that we then know that in this environment, in the Edenvale Methodist Church, we've got champions that stand against sexual harassment, we've got champions that stand against women abuse, so that if there's any woman who has been abused, regardless of her status, somebody will stand up and say, I know this person, and speak out for them. So that's what I believe it is very important, so that we do not discriminate against those poor and illiterate, and make sure that even if they are poor or illiterate, they are able to raise their voice, and we know that there will be people who raise their voice on their behalf, so that their voices can be loud to be heard in the corridors where there is a need to hear that voice.
Yeah. Also, I think consciousness and people may being aware of what instruments are there,
yes,
for them to access justice and what we stand for as,
yes,
as the church. But I also want to re-emphasize, as I said, it is important that at this time where we are really suffering from ethical and moral integrity as a society, that the church zooms into that space and really deal with issues of morality and ethics and good behavior and our relationship with Jesus Christ. Because I believe that if we are really people of good spiritual moral conduct, then we not even get to go to a place where the law has got to be applied, because we are well behaved, we are guided by the Spirit and the Word of God, as you said.
Yes, because the church in the past has to be seen as a sanctuary, where people who are having issues they will run to. But now you find that they try to run to the church, they get even worse.
Yeah.
So which is something that we need them to change, that kind of attitudes, those kind of behavior, so that when people look at the church, they look as a place where they can go and express their dissatisfaction, they can cry and explain their challenge, so that we know as a church we'll be listening to say, there is somebody who's crying at a certain corner, let's go and help. That's what the church is all about.
Yes, yes. But even, ethically speaking, the use of church resources, money, for church going on litigation, you would know this better than me, but there was a time a few years ago where Reverend Nyobole, as the General Secretary, was giving report at conference, and I remember him clearly decrying the fact that we are spending about hundreds of thousands of rands in litigation, just in litigation. I think that is just horrible. It's abhorrent for us to be using money like that in legal matters that shouldn't have been there in the first place.
Yes, what is happening in the main of most of those matters is because the church, in some instances, takes time to react.
Yeah.
Takes time to deal with issues, and people become disgruntled and confused and really want to say, where do I go?
Okay.
And now they have no option but to approach the courts, which is not what's supposed to be happening.
Yes.
Because the church has to listen, the church has to react to the cries. When people come to the church and say, this is the situation, because we all know that there's been an issue in the church around how money has been spent, and people laying charges against responsible officials, but nothing happening.
Yeah.
And it's still becoming a norm that people know that no, because this is the money of the church, nobody will deal with me.
Yeah.
So which is something very wrong that the church must start acting upon it, so that we know that when we bring in people to become custodians of our church properties, they know their responsibilities, not to disadvantage members of the church or to take advantage of the elderly who are paying their last cents for the church's mission. Yes.
Maybe let's close this session by just sharing with people that might be watching this and are not aware. If I am aggrieved within the church and I need to complain about a member, whether it's an ordinary member or is a minister, what do I do? What steps must I take?
As an ordinary member, first, if you are aggrieved with another member of the church, first thing to do is to go to the superintendent and report to say, I've got this challenge. And then the superintendent will take it up, and then there are processes put down in chapter 11 to say how those matters should be attended to. And if it's against the minister, the superintendent must again be informed in that area. If that's superintendent, then the bishop must be informed to say there's this superintendent in your district who has committed certain things, and then the matters will then be reported to the disciplinary registrar, who will then investigate. If there's a charge that needs to be preferred, then charges will be preferred. If there's no charge, then it will then respond and say there's no case here, let the matter be closed. Or in some instances, we know that there must be a pastoral commission to investigate, especially when it comes to ministerial misconduct, so that you must first establish what really happened. Yes.
And then there was that law that of the church that prevents us to take the church to court. I can't remember that was, but you know what I'm talking
yes,
about,
I know.
right? Now let's take a typical example. It's a very bad and horrible example. But let's say a preacher within the church rapes a young person, right? Within a church, maybe they were on at a convention or a synod, and that thing happens. Now, it's a criminal thing, isn't it? In terms of our laws in the countries. How do we balance that? The church says you can't take us to court, but there is a physical violation that has happened here in terms of rape. What do we do?
I mean, the church is expected to report matters of this nature to the police.
Okay.
And as a result, if it's that kind of an instance or incident, that person has to be charged with rape, because it has nothing to do with the church. And when you open the case, the person is not opening the case against the church. It's opening the case against a particular individual to say this person violated my rights as a woman or violated my rights as a man, and as a result, I want to lay criminal charges. And that does not implicate the church, but however, the church still has to discipline the person
in terms of its
processes.
Okay.
To say this preacher who has violated or raped this child must then be disciplined. So it is not, then the church will then go through its internal processes of discipline, regardless of what the criminal case is all about. Or the church may say, let's allow criminal process to proceed. Whatever happens, will then proceed with our own internal process. So they may run concurrently or not.
Yes. I wanted to ask, can you then have parallel processes, discipline within the church and criminal case?
You can, because they don't they don't depend on each other.
Okay.
Remember the modus operandi of dealing with this internal process discipline is
Right.
different to what is happening in court.
Right.
So what we are looking at is in terms of behavior. What the church
Okay.
says, a person of this status, a person as a member of the LPA, this is how he must behave within the church. That's how we are going to discipline. We are not going to charge him with rape because we are not a court.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So there is a great possibility. For instance, let's go with the rape example.
Yes.
Where the ordinary secular court says not found guilty.
Yes.
And then the person yet this side is found guilty.
It's possible that in terms of our discipline, we
Okay.
found him guilty
Okay.
of this behavior.
Right.
But the court may say, in terms of the circumstances and the evidence before us,
Yes.
we don't find you guilty. So hence it's very important that sometimes they don't have to wait for each other.
Yes.
The church can
Yes.
proceed
Yes.
and deal with this person, and the court can proceed. Or the church may say that, considering the circumstances of the matter, let's await what the court says and we'll
Yes.
deal with this person. If he's
Okay.
found guilty,
Okay.
it becomes even aggravating circumstances
Yes.
to the case that we are having.
Okay.
So that's what, depending on the chairperson to decide how he wants to treat the matter.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
That's very helpful because
Yes.
I know in my own experience I've had situations where I wasn't quite sure how to guide a member with the criminal case still going on and then the processes of
Discipline in the church,
going
yes.
on. Oh,
Yeah, so it's, I mean, same as at work. If a person is found, maybe is found stealing money in a till, a cashier for example,
yes,
the employer may lay criminal charges against him for theft,
right.
but also may charge him within the company with discipline. And they may have to weigh the two options to say, what do we do? Do we discipline him first, or do we allow the court? And
Yes.
if they found guilty, then it becomes part of our charges here. That now, even that you are found guilty, if you are sentenced to 6 months, it becomes a reason for us to even dismiss you. So those are the circumstances people can adjudicate on these matters.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Well, I think unfortunately we have run out of time. It's been a very interesting discussion,
Yeah.
and it will surely continue. And I just want to get if maybe there are closing thoughts or maybe wisdom that you would like to share with regard to this matter, given your experience. Just as a man, we're talking here in a time of gender-based violence. I don't know what you want to just say. Just your closing comments on this matter.
I think what is important is that our people must not remain silent anymore.
Okay.
I think the time is now that people must speak out of challenges they're experiencing, of the violations that they experience, the abuses that they're experiencing, either at work or in the church or in the families, because the more they remain silent, the more perpetrators cause more damage, and they may end up even victimizing more people because of one person who remains silent, or that person who remains silent might have been a key to the rest of the other people speaking out. So it's very important people must stand up and say, we cannot do it. We've got various organizations, not in our name, even our church organization, the Young Men's Manyano, they are standing against abuse of women and children. So as a church, we also need to start protecting rights of victims. We need to ensure that we empower victims and support them so that they know that even if I'm going to be accused of lying, knowing the truth, somebody is here to support me. Because in some instances, a person may come crying, and you find that the process that has been engaged in terms of disciplining the perpetrator exposes her more in terms of humiliation, and people sometimes end up not coming through. So, but if they know that there is support from an organization or from the church itself, people then come and speak out because they know I've got a shoulder to cry on.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you so much for
Thank you
coming.
very much.
And from my side, I just want to say to God's people out there that might be watching this, to say, look, we are people of grace, we are people of forgiveness, we are people of integrity and moral and ethical behavior. The law is there as an instrument to offer justice to the victims. Let us all be righteous in our actions and try and strive for perfection. We believe in the doctrine that says we are striving for perfection.
Yes.
Let's strive for perfection. Let's do what is right. Let's stand for justice. Let's raise awareness. Let's support the victims, particularly the weak, the oppressed, and the fallen, so that the justice can be experienced by the weakest within our society. But other than that, grace does not abolish the law. In fact, grace himself, who is Jesus, said, I am not here to abolish the law, but to fulfill it. So we can forgive you, and we will indeed pray for you, but you still have got to take responsibility
Definitely.
for the actions that you have taken.
Yes.
So, you know what? Just go behave, man. That's all I'm asking you.
Yes.
Thank you. God
Thank you.
bless. The alignment.